It is what it is.
It is what it is.
Okay, first one's Michigan State. 'Cause they stood out as a team that didn't belong to me, and they got in comfortably at a 9 seed in the West region. So we're going to start with their schedule. And my evaluation system is who'd you beat? Who'd you beat at home? Who'd you beat on the road? Who'd you beat non-conference? Who'd you beat in conference? None of that net ratings, none of that quad one, all that nonsense. So we're going to start from scratch. We're starting with James Madison. All right. Let's start with James Madison. Okay, James Madison, they lost at home 76-79. Now, that's a good loss. Even though it's at home, James Madison is a tournament team. That's a tournament team. 31-3, that's a tournament team. Okay, we're moving on to Southern Indiana. Southern Indiana, a win. And Southern Indiana was garbage this year. Was absolute trash. So that's a win, but a bad win. However you want to call it. We move on to Duke on the 14th of November. They lost that game 65-74 in the United Center. So we're talking about a neutral site, a classic, and they lost that game. So their first big game they lost, and in Chicago, that's a home. That should be a home game for Michigan State, even though Duke travels well. That's a home game for Michigan State, and they lost that one. We move on to Butler on the 17th of November at home. They won. Butler was a middling Big East team. Middling, not a tournament team. Then we move on to Alcorn State at home, a blowout victory. Alcorn State was garbage this year. That's the note that I wrote down for Alcorn State. Be it as you will, they were trash this year, but they'll take that victory. That's another victory at home. A lot of the victories at home. Then they go out to Arizona, to Palm Springs, California. So that is a neutral site against Arizona, and they lost that game 68-74. So it's a competitive game, but they lost it. So they're losing competitive games. Next game is Georgia Southern. They won that game by 31 points at home. So Georgia Southern came in, and let me see. They're not a tournament team. Georgia Southern, not a tournament team. We're moving on to Wisconsin at home. And they lost that game 57-70. Wisconsin's obviously a tournament team. So their first Big Ten test, Wisconsin, they lost at home. Nebraska, they played Nebraska next on the 10th of December and lost that game in Lincoln. So they went out on the road, lost that game. 2 straight Big Ten losses. It's not looking good. Then the next game is a neutral site game against Baylor in Detroit. You know what? In Detroit, Michigan, that's a home game for Michigan State. And they won that game 88-64. So a resounding victory against a tournament team, top 4 seed in Baylor. That's a good win, a nice win. That's their biggest win of the year. Then we move on to Oakland. They beat Oakland, and I believe Oakland is a tournament team this year. So that's another nice win, but at home. You notice they go out on the road, they get beat. This is at home. And yes, the Baylor victory, that was a home game. Detroit, Michigan, that's a home game. They go against Stony Brook next. And what did I write down for Stony Brook? Stony Brook, 27. They were 27-4 this year. I think they were number 1 in their conference in the regular season and lost their tournament final. So they didn't get to go to the tournament this year. This is actually a nice win, a resounding win against a good team out of conference. But again, at home. And it's not a tournament team, Stony Brook. Then they go against Indiana State, who was also a team that could have made the tournament at large. But I believe they lost their tournament final. They're not in the tournament this year. I don't believe they're in the tournament this year. Another nice win against an out-of-conference team, but it's not a tournament team. And at home. You guys noticing a pattern? Another home game against Penn State. They won by 30. Penn State wasn't good this year. I believe they were under 500 this year. And that was at home. So another home victory. Then they face Northwestern on the road. That's the tournament team. Lost 74-88. So that's another Big Ten loss. And then they go back out on the 11th of January to Illinois and lost that game 68-71. on the roads. Yeah, you guys noticing the pattern? They don't win on the road. If the team's good, they don't win on the road. They go against Rutgers. Rutgers was bad this year. Under 500 this year. They won 73-55 at home. Then they go against Minnesota and win that game. What do I have written about for Minnesota? They were over 500 for the regular season record, but they're under 500 in the conference. Not a tournament team. Maryland, they beat Maryland. Maryland was under 500 this year. Yeah, they were under 500 this year. At home. No, I'm sorry. That was on the road. I apologize. That's a solid road victory probably at the time. But again, not a tournament team. They go against Wisconsin on the road. Lost that game 66-81. And you know Wisconsin's a tournament team. So you guys see the picture here. They don't win on the road. They win at home if it's not a good team. And neutral sites have been close to Michigan State's campus. So those have been home games. You move on to Michigan, who was the worst team in the Big Ten this year. And they won resoundingly 81-62 on the 30th of January. And that was at home. We got Maryland. Okay, 63-54 at home. So they swept Maryland this year on the 3rd of February. Then we're going against Minnesota. They lost that game on the road. And what did I write down for Minnesota? Minnesota was not a tournament team this year. Illinois, that's a bad loss. Illinois, they beat, that's a good win. At home in East Lansing, 88-80, that's a good win. That's a good win. That with that win and the Baylor victory are their two biggest victories. Penn State, okay, Penn State, they beat Penn State in Penn State, so they swept Penn State for the year. Penn State, as we know, is not a tournament team. Michigan, you know Michigan's the worst team in the Big Ten, so they won that at Michigan. So they swept Michigan. So you see they swept Michigan, swept Penn State. But you don't see them sweeping the top teams, whether it be Illinois, Wisconsin, Purdue, or even the Iowas. No, we're going to move on to Iowa. They had Iowa at home and lost that game 71-78. And that's another bad loss. Did Iowa make the tournament? They're not a tournament team this year. So that's a bad loss. In the grand scheme of things, in the strength of schedule, whatever you want to call it. That's a bad loss. Ohio State, that's not a tournament team. They lost that game. At home, another bad loss. You guys see the picture? Does this sound like a tournament team to you? We're moving on to Purdue. Purdue, they lost that game. Top 3 team in the country, lost that game in West Lafayette. So on the road, they do not win. Next game is Northwestern. That's a good win. At home, 53-49. So that was a slugfest. 53-49, and Northwestern's a tournament team. So now we have a win against Northwestern, a win against Illinois, a win against Baylor. So those are 3 nice wins. And the Baylor win is their standout victory. That's a non-conference victory. They go against Indiana. That's not a tournament team. And they lost at Indiana. Indiana's a tough place to play. I won't get on them for that. Indiana's a tough place to play, whether they're good or not. But Indiana was so-so this year. Do you have anything written down for them? Okay, no. Now we're moving on to Minnesota. They beat Minnesota. Remember, Minnesota's not a tournament team. Just to make sure. They're under 500 in the conference. No. And that's a good win. I mean, that's a good Big Ten victory, but nothing that helps your resume, your tournament resume. Oh, those are Big Ten tournament games. Okay, yeah, they beat Minnesota and Purdue. And in the Purdue game, they lost 62-67. So they fought valiantly, but neutral site lost to Purdue. So they lost to Purdue 3 times this year. And that's not any slight on Michigan State in their program, but they don't have any big wins in the well, they beat Illinois. That's it. And Baylor non-conference. So and they're safely in the tournament. So in my evaluation, they've beaten Baylor, James Madison, Wisconsin. So non-conference victories, they beat Baylor and James Madison, who are tournament teams, and Oakland, who's a tournament team. That's it. And in conference, they beat Illinois. And they beat. Did they beat Wisconsin this year? No, they got swept by Wisconsin. No, they got swept by Wisconsin. That's not a tournament team. I'm sorry. Michigan State's not a tournament team, especially not to get in comfortably at a 9 seed. That's not a tournament team. And lost your second round matchup. That's not a tournament team. They have a win against Oakland, a win against James Madison, and a win against Baylor, non-conference. That's a big win. And then you beat Illinois. That's it. And Northwestern. So you beat two tournament teams, Illinois and Northwestern, in conference. That's not a tournament team. That's Tom Izzo and his effect in that room. We have to reevaluate how they deliberate in those rooms. They got too many Big Ten guys in there, too many SEC guys in there, and for some reason there was a lot of Big 12 guys in there. 2 conferences got 8 bids, and the Big East got 3, and the Big East had 5 teams that were tournament ready. ACC disrespected with 5 bids. And the Big 12, I'm going to talk about that in a second. The Big 12, I believe they're one of the teams with 8 bids. That's absolute nonsense. But Michigan State's not a tournament team. They got in comfortably at 9. I'm watching ESPN, Jay Billis and Jay Williams and Seth Greenberg, and the commentator, it could have been Seth Davis. No, it's probably not Seth Davis. But the commentator on ESPN asked them a question. Did you have any issues with seeding? And they go to the West region and they see the 8-9 game. They ain't got no problem with that. You got North Carolina as the 1 seed, and they're going to be going against the winner of Mississippi State Bulldogs and Michigan State. I got a problem with that. Michigan State shouldn't even be in a tournament. There's 2 teams in the Big East that I'll talk about later that should be in the tournament over Michigan State. And they got in comfortably at 9. They're not last 4 out, first 4 in. They're at 9. They're on a 9 seed. That's a disgrace.